My father pushed me down the stairs and said, "Get rid of that child." Enjoy my new story.
On September 19th, my father grabbed me by both shoulders at the top of the staircase in our family home on Prospect Avenue in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. My 4-month-old daughter Rosie was in my arms. He shoved me backward because I refused to hand my baby over to my older brother, like she was a piece of furniture someone could borrow and never give back. I caught the railing with one hand. I twisted my whole body around Rosie like a shell, and I slid down 3 steps on my back, the carpet burning straight through my shirt. My wrist bent sideways. My daughter was screaming. And my father, Gordon Chambers, stood at the top of those stairs and yelled down at me that the inheritance belonged to my brother, and I needed to get rid of that child. That's a real sentence from my real life. Some nights I still can't believe it came out of my own father's mouth. My name is Edith. I'm 31 years old. I work as a dental hygienist at a practice on Hamilton Boulevard in Allentown. I pay my own rent, I file my own taxes, and I haven't asked my parents for a single dollar since I was 19. And somehow, in the eyes of my family, I was still never good enough. Growing up in the Chambers house meant learning one rule early. My older brother Keith could do no wrong, and I could do no right, and this wasn't subtle. When Keith turned 16, my parents bought him a brand new Jeep Wrangler. Cherry red, right off the lot, big bow on the hood like a car commercial. When I turned 16, I got Keith's old mountain bike, the one with the bent front wheel that pulled to the left so hard you'd think it was trying to escape the family, too. I rode that crooked bike to my first job at a frozen yogurt shop on Wyandotte Street and told myself it built character. Keith went to Penn State. My parents covered every cent, $61,000 over 4 years. I went to Northampton Community College and took out $31,000 in student loans that I'm still paying off. When I asked my father why the difference, he looked me right in the eye at the Sunday dinner table and said Keith had more potential. Just like that, like he was commenting on the weather. And you know what the worst part is? For a long time, I believed him. That's what being the invisible child does to you. You don't realize you're invisible until somebody finally sees you. That somebody was Troy Weston, my husband. We met at a friend's barbecue in Easton when I was 26. Troy's a diesel mechanic at a trucking depot. Hands like sandpaper, heart like butter. The first time he came to meet my parents, he wore a pressed button-down and brought my mother a bouquet of tulips he'd picked up at the Wawa on Sullivan Trail. My mother, Phyllis, looked at him like he'd tracked engine grease across her immortal soul. My father shook his hand the way you'd shake hands with someone trying to sell you a driveway you already have. In my family, Troy committed 2 unforgivable sins. He wasn't wealthy, and he treated me like I mattered. Both were apparently offensive. We got married at the courthouse in Easton. Small ceremony, 12 people, best day of my life. And last May, our daughter Rosie was born at St. Luke's Hospital. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, full head of dark hair, and a set of lungs that could rattle the windows in the maternity ward. She was perfect. She is perfect. My parents barely acknowledged her existence. Phyllis sent a text that said, "Congrats," with a period at the end. Not even an exclamation point. My father didn't call at all. Keith, who was living in my parents' basement at the time because his wife Janelle had left him 5 months earlier, sent a single thumbs-up emoji. One emoji for my firstborn child. I screenshotted it because honestly, it was almost funny. You know you're low on the family priority list when your birth announcement gets less reaction than a grocery store coupon. But there was one person in the Chambers family who would have cared deeply. My grandmother, Nell Chambers, my father's mother. And if you want to understand everything that happened, the money, the lies, the staircase, the moment that front door opened, you need to understand Nell first. Nell Chambers was the kind of woman who built things with her bare hands and sheer stubbornness. Starting in her 40s, she bought rental properties across the Lehigh Valley, one at a time, fixed them up herself, rented them out. By the time she was 75, she owned 6 units, 3 duplexes spread between Bethlehem, Allentown, and Emmaus. Together, they were worth about $1.9 million. She wasn't flashy about it. She drove the same Buick LeSabre for 11 years and still clipped coupons for dish soap. But the woman had built real, solid wealth, brick by brick, tenant by tenant. 3 years ago, my father moved Nell into Sycamore Ridge Assisted Living. He told the whole family she had advanced dementia, said she couldn't remember names, couldn't manage money, couldn't be trusted on her own anymore. He said it with such calm authority that none of us questioned it. I'm ashamed of that now. I should have visited. I should have picked up the phone and called the facility myself. But I was 28, working full-time, planning a wedding, and I trusted my father. That was my biggest mistake. Gordon became the sole manager of Nell's properties, her bank accounts, her trust, everything. He became the gatekeeper between my grandmother and the outside world, and for 3 years, that's exactly how he wanted it. Then, in the middle of August, my father called a family meeting at the Prospect Avenue house. He said it was about grandmother Nell's estate. He said it was important, and everyone needed to be there. What he didn't say was that by the end of that conversation, he would ask me to do something so outrageous, so completely unhinged, that I would realize my parents didn't just prefer my brother over me. They were willing to sacrifice my child for him. Before we continue, please hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read every single one, and it truly means the world to me. Now, back to what happened. August 14th, a humid evening, the kind where the air sticks to your skin before you even get out of the car. Troy and I drove to the Prospect Avenue house after I finished my shift at the dental office. We left Rosie with Troy's mother back in Easton. Something about my father's voice on the phone told me this wasn't going to be a casual family dinner. I wanted my hands free and my head clear. The house smelled like Phyllis's pot roast and Lysol, my mother's 2 signature scents. You could always tell the emotional temperature of the Chambers household by what Phyllis was cooking. Pot roast meant she was performing. She wanted this evening to feel normal, like a family just sitting down to talk. It wasn't. Gordon sat at the head of the dining table with a manila folder in front of him. Phyllis stood by the kitchen counter with her arms crossed like a sentry. And Keith sat in the corner chair, looking like a man who hadn't slept in 6 months, which honestly, he probably hadn't. His hair was greasy. His shirt had a stain on the collar. This was a 35-year-old man who had been reduced to a ghost of himself by his own choices, and he still couldn't see it. My father opened the manila folder and laid it all out. He said Grandmother Nell's trust contained a specific clause. The grandchild, who was the primary caregiver of a minor child, would receive the family home on Prospect Avenue, valued at $380,000, plus 70% of the entire property portfolio. The grandchild without children would get the remaining 30%. Since I had Rosie, I qualified for the house and the bigger share. Keith did not. And then Gordon said the words that changed everything. He told me I had 2 options. Either I could sign temporary custody of Rosie over to Keith, making Keith the qualifying grandchild under the trust, or I could sign a separate document, relinquishing my entire inheritance claim. Either way, Keith would get what he deserved. His word. Deserved. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain literally could not process what I just heard. My father, my own father, was asking me to hand my 4-month-old baby to my brother, a 35-year-old man living in a basement, a man whose wife, Janelle, had walked out 7 months ago because he'd blown through $67,000 on online poker and weekend trips to the Parks Casino in Bensalem, a man whose credit score was 480, and I only knew that because Janelle mentioned it to me the one time we talked after she left. Keith's idea of financial planning was hoping the next hand would pay his electric bill, and now he was supposed to be the primary caregiver of an infant. Phyllis jumped in immediately. She put her hand on my arm, that move she does when she wants you to think she's being gentle, but really she's just pinning you down, and she told me this wasn't about me. She said Keith needed this more. She said I had Troy, I had my job, I had stability. Keith had nothing. And family, she said, takes care of family. I looked at my mother and I thought, you have never once taken care of me. Not when I needed braces at 14 and you said we couldn't afford them. 2 months before you bought Keith a PlayStation. Not when I graduated from hygienist school and you forgot to come because Keith had a flat tire and somehow that was a 2-person emergency. You never once put me first. But now I'm supposed to hand over my child because family takes care of family? Troy, who had been standing in the doorway with his arms folded and his jaw getting tighter by the minute, said exactly 4 words. He told them we were leaving, and we left. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam anything. He just put his hand on my back and walked me out the door. That's who Troy is. Steady when I can't be. That should have been the end of it. But the Chambers family does not believe in endings. Starting the next morning, my phone became a weapon. Phyllis texted every single day. Long, guilt-soaked messages about sacrifice and loyalty and how I was tearing the family apart. Gordon left voicemails. Short, cold, controlled. He said I had until September 19th to make the right decision. He said if I didn't cooperate, he would make things very difficult. He didn't explain what that meant. He didn't need to. My phone was going off so much that Troy asked if I was running for office. Between Phyllis's daily guilt novels, Gordon's voicemail threats, and Keith's one sad emoji per night, I had more notifications than a teenager on prom night. Keith started texting me separately too, pathetic, half-begging messages. One said he'd take really good care of Rosie. Another said he just needed the inheritance to get back on his feet, like a baby was a ladder rung, like my daughter was a tool for his recovery. But here's what really started eating at me. I drove past the Prospect Avenue house one afternoon that week, and something caught my eye. My father, a facilities coordinator at a community college in the Lehigh Valley, probably pulling in $62,000 a year, was standing in the driveway next to a brand new Ford F-150 Lariat. That truck runs about $58,000. And through the front window, I noticed the kitchen had new countertops. Looked like quartz. Definitely not the old cracked Formica I grew up eating cereal on. Where was that money coming from? I put that question in a box in the back of my mind. It would matter later, a lot more than I knew. Troy wanted to drive over and confront Gordon himself. I stopped him. Not because I doubted Troy, but because I knew my father. If Troy lost his temper even once, Gordon would call the police, play the victim, file a complaint. My father wasn't stupid. He was calculating. And the only way to beat a calculator is with better math. That week, I pulled together every document with my name on it. Bank statements, insurance papers, our lease, Rosie's birth certificate, my marriage license. I bought a small fireproof lockbox at the Staples on Airport Road for $39.99, and I put copies of everything inside. I wish someone had told me to do that at 20 years old. You don't think you need a paper trail until the day you desperately do. I was ready to cut them all off, change my number, block every Chambers in my phone, and raise my daughter in peace. But then, on August 26th, I got a call from a woman named Patrice Okafor. She was a nurse at Sycamore Ridge Assisted Living, the place where my grandmother Nell had been locked away for 3 years. What Patrice told me made me realize the inheritance fight was only the surface. Underneath it was something much, much darker. Patrice Okafor had been at Sycamore Ridge for about 6 months. She was a registered nurse, spoke in a calm and careful voice, the kind of person who chooses every word before she says it. She told me she'd found my number on an old emergency contact form my grandmother had filled out years ago, before Gordon took over everything. She said she had concerns about my grandmother's care situation, specifically about the restrictions Gordon had placed on her. And then she said something that made me pull my car over to the shoulder of Hamilton Boulevard and just sit there with the engine running. She told me my grandmother did not have advanced dementia. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, not breathing. 3 years. 3 years my family had told me Nell was gone, that she couldn't remember faces, couldn't follow conversations, couldn't function. And now a nurse was telling me that was a lie. Patrice explained that when she started at Sycamore Ridge in March, the staff briefed her on Nell's file. Dementia patient, confused, prone to paranoid accusations about her family, standard protocol, limit stimulation, restrict visitors per the power of attorney holder's instructions, and redirect when she became agitated. But Patrice couldn't make that file match the woman she actually met. because Nell Chambers was running a Tuesday Scrabble tournament in the common room and winning almost every single week. She'd organized a Thursday book club with 9 regular members. She was halfway through a 700-page biography of Dolly Parton and had opinions about the stock market that were sharper than most financial advisors I've met. She told Patrice that anyone who didn't have at least a small index fund was, in her exact words, leaving money on the sidewalk. Gordon told the whole family his mother couldn't remember her own name. The very first thing Nell told Patrice the day they met was the exact balance of her savings account, down to the cent. This woman was sharper than a brand new pair of kitchen scissors, and my father had the whole world believing she'd lost her mind. Here's how Gordon did it, step by step, like a manual for erasing a person. First, he took Nell's cell phone, told the staff it was overstimulating her. Second, he filed power of attorney paperwork and listed himself as the sole authorized visitor. No one else could see her without his written permission. Third, and this is the part that makes my stomach turn every time I think about it, he told the nursing staff that Nell suffered from paranoid episodes as part of her dementia. So when Nell told the nurses that her son was stealing her money, they didn't investigate. They wrote it down as a symptom. They patted her hand and changed the subject. A woman telling the truth, and nobody believed her because her own son had labeled her crazy. Nell tried to get help. She asked staff members to make phone calls for her. She asked them to send letters, but she didn't have anyone's number memorized. Because honestly, who does anymore? Everything had been in the phone Gordon took. She didn't know my new address either because I'd moved after marrying Troy. And when your POA holder has told the facility you're paranoid and delusional, your words stop meaning anything. You become a woman yelling into a soundproof room. For 3 years, Patrice was different because she walked in with fresh eyes. She hadn't been trained on Gordon's version of reality. She saw an 81-year-old woman running book clubs, cracking jokes about the cafeteria meatloaf and organizing game nights. And then she saw the chart that said severe cognitive decline. Those 2 pictures didn't match. And in Pennsylvania, Patrice was what's called a mandated reporter. If she suspected elder abuse or neglect, she was legally required to act. So she dug up that old emergency contact form from a filing cabinet, found my number, and called. 2 days later, on a quiet morning when I knew Gordon would be at work, I drove to Sycamore Ridge. I signed in at the front desk, and Patrice walked me down a quiet hallway to room 14B. My grandmother was sitting in a blue armchair by the window, reading a library copy of a mystery novel with a cracked spine. She looked thinner than I remembered, smaller, but her eyes were the same. Quick and sharp and full of something that 3 years of isolation hadn't managed to put out. She looked up at me, and for a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then she said my name, clear as a bell. No hesitation, no confusion. Just my name, like I'd visited last week instead of 3 years ago. I'd brought Rosie. I was breastfeeding, so she went wherever I went, strapped to my chest in a carrier. I lifted her out and placed her in Nell's arms, and my grandmother's hands started trembling. Not from weakness, from something much bigger than that. Nobody had told her I'd had a baby. 3 years in that room, and not one person mentioned she had a great-granddaughter. She held Rosie and stared at her face for a long time. Then she looked up at me and said the baby had her nose. And she was sorry about that because it wasn't her best feature. I laughed so hard I nearly woke up the woman napping next door. That was Nell. Even in the middle of all this darkness, she could find something to be funny about. Once she composed herself, Nell got very focused, very still, the kind of stillness I remembered from when I was a little girl and she'd sit at her kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of rent checks, running numbers on her properties. She was in business mode. She told me that her original trust, written by her attorney, Warren Healy, out of his office on 7th Street in downtown Allentown, divided everything equally between me and Keith, 50-50. No conditions, no clauses about children or caregiving, just a clean, fair split because, as she put it, both her grandchildren deserved an equal start in life. But 2 years ago, Gordon fired Warren Healy, didn't give a reason, just told him his services were no longer needed. Then he brought in a man named Glenn Fisk, a lawyer, who, as far as Nell understood, did whatever Gordon asked him to do. Fisk rewrote the trust. He added the clause about the grandchild with a minor child receiving the Prospect Avenue house plus 70% of the portfolio. At the time, Keith was still married to Janelle, and they were supposedly trying to have a baby. Gordon had bet that Keith would have a child first, but then Janelle left Keith in January because of the gambling. And 5 months later, I had Rosie. Gordon's own rigged game backfired on him. The clause he created to help Keith now helped me, and he couldn't undo it without admitting he'd committed fraud. So his only way out was to make me hand over my daughter or give up my share entirely. That explained the desperation. That explained the pressure. My father wasn't just greedy. He was trapped by his own lie. And the money, so that was worse. Nell told me that before Gordon took her phone, she'd already noticed the numbers didn't add up. Her 6 properties generated about $8,400 in combined monthly rent, but the deposits into her accounts were only around $3,200. Every single month, more than $5,000 just vanished. Over 3 years, that came to roughly $187,000. Gone. Into my father's pocket. My father wasn't just playing favorites. He was robbing his own mother blind while she sat in a room with no phone and no visitors, labeled too crazy for anyone to believe. If you have a parent or grandparent in a care facility, go visit them. Not on Christmas, not on their birthday. Go on a random Tuesday morning, sit with them, ask how they really are. Because sometimes the person who's supposed to be protecting them is the one they need protection from. That night, I sat in my car in the Sycamore Ridge parking lot. Rosie was asleep in her car seat. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to change my number and hide. I was going to take my father apart, legally, quietly, and completely, and my 81-year-old grandmother, the woman my father tried to erase from the world. She already had a plan. She'd been sitting in that room for 3 years with nothing but time and fury. And believe me, Nell Chambers had thought this through far better than I ever could have. The first thing Nell told me during my second visit to Sycamore Ridge was that revenge is a dish best served with documentation. She said it with a completely straight face, sitting in that blue armchair, and I realized then that my grandmother hadn't just been sitting in that room for 3 years, feeling sorry for herself. She'd been thinking, cataloging, waiting for someone, anyone, to walk through that door and hand her the one thing she didn't have, a connection to the outside world. Now she had me, and that was all she needed. We had 3 weeks. Gordon had given me a deadline of September 19th, the date of the next family meeting where I was supposed to either sign custody of Rosie over to Keith or surrender my inheritance. Fine. We'd use every single day. The first call I made was to Warren Healy, Nell's original estate attorney. His office was on 7th Street in downtown Allentown, above a sandwich shop that smelled like roast beef and mustard, the kind of building where real work gets done by people who don't need marble floors to prove they're serious. Warren was in his late 60s, silver-haired, reading glasses on a chain, and when I sat across from his desk and explained what Gordon had done, the man's face went through about 6 emotions in 10 seconds. The last one was cold, focused anger. Warren told me he'd been suspicious when Gordon fired him 2 years ago. No explanation, no notice, just a letter saying his services were no longer required. He'd considered reaching out to Nell directly, but was told by Gordon that she had dementia and couldn't communicate, so he let it go. He said he'd regretted that decision every day since, and now he intended to correct it. He pulled Nell's original trust from his files. Everything was right there in black and white, 50-50, split between me and Keith. No conditions about children, no clause about caregiving. Clean and fair, exactly how Nell described it. Then I showed him the documents Gordon had given me at the August 14th meeting, the modified trust prepared by Glenn Fisk. Warren put them side by side and shook his head, like a mechanic looking at someone else's bad wiring job. The modifications were significant. Keith's share had been inflated to 70%, plus the Prospect Avenue house, all contingent on the primary caregiver of a minor child clause that Nell had never approved and never signed. Glenn Fisk had used Gordon's power of attorney to authorize the changes, which was only legal if Nell was truly incapacitated and the changes served her interests. Neither was true. Warren said one word, challengeable. Then he said another word, criminal. Step 2 was the money. This part took me 2 weekends, a laptop, and about 4 pots of coffee. Nell remembered her online banking login, because of course she did, and with Patrice's help accessing a computer at the facility, we pulled 3 years of deposit records. I also went to the Lehigh County Courthouse and pulled property tax records for all 6 rental units, which are public information. Then I cross-referenced the expected rental income against what was actually deposited into Nell's accounts. The gap was staggering. Nell's properties brought in roughly $8,400 per month in combined rent, but only about $3,200 was hitting her accounts. The remaining $5,200 per month was being diverted. I built a spreadsheet, month by month, property by property, and the total over 36 months came to approximately $187,400. That money had been flowing straight into Gordon's personal checking account, and from there, some of it went somewhere I didn't expect, but I'll get to that in a minute. Step 3 was the most important piece, proving Nell was competent, because Gordon's entire defense would be that his mother had dementia and he was acting in her best interests. We needed a doctor to blow that apart. Warren arranged for an independent geriatrician, Dr. Rana Salazar out of Lehigh Valley Hospital, to visit Nell at Sycamore Ridge. She conducted a full cognitive assessment, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, a clock drawing test, memory recall exercises, the works. Nell scored in the normal range for her age group, mild, age-appropriate memory lapses, the kind where you walk into a room and forget why, which honestly I do at 31, so that's just being human. Dr. Salazar's written report stated in clear clinical language that Nell Chambers was fully competent to manage her own affairs and make her own decisions. The doctor also noted in a separate addendum that the conditions of Nell's isolation, no phone, restricted visitors, sole POA controlled by a family member, raised serious red flags consistent with elder abuse. That report was a grenade with the pin already pulled. We just needed to decide when to throw it. By the second week of September, Warren had assembled the full package: the original trust, the fraudulent modifications, the financial discrepancy spreadsheet, Dr. Salazar's cognitive assessment, a formal complaint to the Lehigh County District Attorney's Office for financial exploitation of an elderly adult under Pennsylvania Act 13, a petition to revoke Gordon's power of attorney, and a motion to restore the original trust terms. Everything was filed on September 15th, 4 days before the meeting. And here's the part that still gives me a strange, grim kind of satisfaction. On September 15th, when Warren walked that complaint into the DA's office, when those bank records hit a prosecutor's desk, when Nell's cognitive assessment was entered into the official record, my father was at home watching a baseball game. He had no idea. The walls of his life were already falling, and he was sitting in his recliner thinking he'd won. Pretending I was still considering his offer during those 3 weeks was the hardest performance of my life. I called Gordon on September 10th, let my voice tremble a little, and told him I was thinking about it, that I needed more time, but I understood his position. He was magnanimous on the phone, the way powerful people get when they think you're about to surrender. He told me to take a few more days. He told me he knew I'd do the right thing. I deserve an Oscar for that phone call, or at the very least a gift card to Target. Troy and I prepared for September 19th together. It was his idea to have Nell and Warren nearby as a safety plan. He didn't trust Gordon, never had, and he wanted witnesses close. Nell and Warren would park on the next block in Warren's car. If anything went wrong, Troy would text one word and they'd come in. Patrice Okafor agreed to accompany Nell as her medical attendant. 3 people, 1 block away, ready if needed. Some people might think that was overkill. But Troy grew up in a house where his father punched holes in drywall when dinner was late. He recognized danger the way some people recognize weather, in the pressure change before the storm hits, and he wasn't about to let me walk into that house without a backup plan. My savings account at that time had about $9,200 in it. Not a fortune, but enough to give me options. I'd been putting away $150 every paycheck since I was 24, even when it was tight, especially when it was tight. That little cushion meant I didn't have to say yes to anything out of desperation. If this story teaches you one thing, let it be that. A small savings account won't change your life overnight, but it might keep someone else from controlling it. The night before September 19th, I stood in Rosie's nursery at 2 in the morning, watching her sleep. She was wearing a onesie with little strawberries on it. Her hands were curled into tiny fists, the way babies do, like she was ready to fight the world and she hadn't even opened her eyes yet. I whispered to her that tomorrow was going to be a hard day, but that everything I was doing was for her. Then I went to bed, set my alarm for 6, and didn't sleep a single minute. September 19th, a Friday, 6 in the evening. The sky over Bethlehem was that bruised purple you get in early fall, the kind that makes everything look like a painting and nothing feel real. Troy drove. I sat in the passenger seat with Rosie in her car seat behind me. I was breastfeeding, so she went where I went. That was simply the math of new motherhood. Troy had suggested leaving her with his mother, but Rosie had been cluster feeding all week and wouldn't take a bottle. And honestly, part of me, the part I'm not proud of, still believed my parents might see their granddaughter and feel something human. That was the last grain of naive hope I had left. It wouldn't survive the night. We pulled onto Prospect Avenue at 5:50. The house looked the same as it always had. Beige vinyl siding, brown shutters. The hedges Phyllis kept trimmed to military precision. Gordon's new Ford F-150 sat in the driveway like a trophy. Troy parked at the curb and sent a text to Warren Healy. "We're here." Warren confirmed he, Nell, and Patrice were parked on Birch Street 1 block north, engine running. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. No pot roast this time. Phyllis wasn't performing anymore. She sat at the dining table with her hands folded, eyes down, the posture of a woman who knew exactly what was about to be asked and had already made peace with it. Gordon stood at the head of the table, manila folder open. Same folder from August 14th, but thicker now. More papers, more signatures, more lines for me to sign away my daughter or my inheritance. He'd printed custody transfer forms. I could see the Lehigh County Family Court header from across the room. Keith sat in the corner. He looked worse than last time, thinner. His knee was bouncing under the table so hard the coffee cups were trembling. He wouldn't look at me. You know that feeling when you look at someone and realize they're not angry at you, they're not scheming against you, they're just drowning, and they'll grab onto anything that floats, even if it means pulling you under? That's what Keith looked like, and I felt sorry for him for exactly 3 seconds, until I remembered what he was willing to let happen to my daughter for a check. Gordon didn't waste time. He tapped the folder and told me this was my last chance. He said he'd been patient. He said he'd been more than fair. He said all I had to do was sign, either the custody papers or the relinquishment form, and we could all move forward as a family. I looked at my father across that table and I felt something I'd never felt before. Not anger, not fear, just a deep, heavy clarity. Like someone had wiped the fog off a window I'd been staring through for 31 years. I told him no, not dramatically, not with a speech, just no. And then I picked up Rosie's car seat from the floor and started walking toward the hallway. What happened next took maybe 7 seconds. It felt like 40 minutes. Gordon moved fast for a 59-year-old man. He stepped into the hallway and blocked my path near the top of the staircase. He wasn't yelling yet. That came after. First he tried the voice, the low, controlled, Gordon knows best voice that had run this family for decades. He told me I was making a mistake. He told me I didn't understand what was at stake. I tried to step around him. He grabbed my shoulders, both hands, hard. I had Rosie's car seat in my left hand. I tried to twist free with my right, but Gordon wasn't letting go. He was gripping me like I was something he owned, like he'd been gripping this whole family his whole life and couldn't physically process someone pulling away. Then he shoved. I went backward. My heel caught the top step. My right hand shot out and grabbed the railing, and I twisted my body, pure instinct, pure motherhood, so that my back hit the stairs and Rosie's car seat stayed level against my chest. I slid down 3 steps. The carpet tore through my shirt and burned the skin off my lower back. My wrist bent sideways against the railing with a hot snap of pain that told me something had gone very wrong in there. Rosie was screaming, that newborn scream that sounds like the whole world is ending, because for her, in that moment, it was. And from the top of the stairs, my father looked down at me and screamed that the inheritance was Keith's and that I needed to get rid of that child. Phyllis stood in the dining room doorway. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there with her hand over her mouth, watching her husband shove her daughter down a staircase, and she did nothing. 31 years of nothing, perfectly consistent to the end. Troy came around the corner from the living room like a freight train. He put himself between me and the staircase, helped me up with one arm, checked Rosie with the other. She was crying but unharmed. The car seat had done its job, and my body had done the rest. My back was on fire, my right wrist was swelling fast. But my daughter was safe. That was the only calculation that mattered. Troy pulled out his phone. He typed one word and sent it to Warren Healy's number. Then he looked at Gordon, still standing at the top of the stairs, breathing hard, face red, and told him he was calling 911. Gordon's expression flickered, just for a second, the first crack. The front door opened 90 seconds later. Warren Healy came in first, gray suit, briefcase, reading glasses still on. Behind him, Patrice Okafor in her scrubs, and behind Patrice, moving slowly with a wooden cane and an expression I will remember until the day I die, my grandmother. Nell Chambers, 81 years old, the woman my father had locked away for 3 years and told the world was gone. She was right there, standing in his hallway, looking up at him. Gordon's face went white, not the white of anger or shock, the white of a man watching the ground open up beneath his feet and realizing there was no bottom. His hands started shaking. His mouth opened and nothing came out. For the first time in my entire life, my father had no words, no control, no script. Keith dropped the coffee cup he'd been holding. It shattered on the dining room floor, and nobody picked it up. Phyllis sat down in the nearest chair like her legs had simply stopped working. Nell didn't yell. She didn't make a speech. She walked into the dining room, pulled out a chair, and sat down at the table like she owned the place, which, technically, she still did. Warren set his briefcase on the table, opened it, and placed a single folder in front of Gordon. Inside that folder was everything. Dr. Salazar's cognitive assessment proving Nell was competent, 36 months of bank records showing the missing $187,000, the original trust beside the fraudulent modification, and a stamped copy of the complaint filed with the Lehigh County District Attorney 4 days earlier. Gordon stared at those documents. I watched his eyes move across the pages, the numbers, the dates, the DA's office letterhead, and I watched him understand. He hadn't lost tonight. He'd lost 4 days ago. Everything since then had been a dead man walking and not knowing it. I'd never seen a person age 10 years in 10 seconds. Gordon went from barking orders to looking like someone just told him he owed the IRS his entire retirement fund. His hands kept shaking. He tried to speak twice, and both times nothing came out but air. Nell looked at her son across that table, and she said, quiet, steady, the voice of a woman who had 3 years to rehearse this moment. Gordon, I raised you, and I have never been more ashamed of anything in my life. That was it. No screaming, no dramatic monologue, just a mother telling her son the truth in 7 words. And somehow, that was worse than anything else she could have said. Troy called 911 at 6:22. 2 officers from Bethlehem PD arrived at 6:39. They documented my injuries, the carpet burns on my back, the swelling in my right wrist. Troy gave his statement. Gordon told them I'd slipped on the stairs. The officers noted both accounts, took photos, and filed a report. They didn't arrest him on the spot, which is frustratingly normal for domestic incidents with conflicting stories in Pennsylvania. They told me I could pursue charges through the DA's office. I already had. We left the Prospect Avenue house at 7:45 that evening. Troy carried Rosie. Warren drove Nell back to Sycamore Ridge. Patrice went with them. Gordon stood in the kitchen alone. Phyllis had gone upstairs without a word. Keith was on the back porch, sitting on the steps in the dark. Nobody said goodbye to any of them. There was nothing left to say. If you've made it this far, you're the reason I keep telling these stories. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love for you to join us. Hit that button and know that it genuinely makes my day every single time. Thank you. Now let me tell you how it ended. 4 days after September 19th, on a Tuesday morning at 7:15, 2 detectives from the Lehigh County DA's office pulled into the driveway of the Prospect Avenue house. Gordon was still in his bathrobe. He'd probably been sleeping badly, or not at all, since Thursday night. They had a warrant for his arrest. The charges: financial exploitation of an older adult under Pennsylvania Act 13, a first-degree felony because the stolen amount exceeded $100,000, theft by deception, also a felony, simple assault, reckless endangerment, and endangering the welfare of a child. Because Rosie was in my arms when he shoved me, they put handcuffs on my father in his own driveway, at the house his mother had paid for, on the street where he'd spent 30 years pretending to be a respectable man. No cameras, no audience, no dramatic scene, just 2 officers, a pair of handcuffs, and the quiet click of a man's entire life locking shut. His bail was set at $75,000. He couldn't pay it. The money in his accounts was stolen money, and those accounts were frozen. Gordon Chambers spent 11 days in the Lehigh County Correctional Facility before Phyllis scraped together a bond using her own savings. 11 nights on a thin mattress for a man who'd just renovated his kitchen with his mother's money. There's a word for that kind of math. I think it's called justice. But Gordon wasn't the only one. 2 weeks later, when forensic accountants finished tracing the money, they found something that hit me harder than the staircase. Phyllis had a separate savings account at a small bank in Easton, not the family's main bank, a different one, under her maiden name. Over 3 years, Gordon had transferred roughly $34,000 into that account. Regular deposits 3 or 4 times a month, small enough to avoid automatic flags. My mother knew. She didn't just look the other way. She profited. Every guilt trip she'd laid on me, every speech about family sacrifice, every time she stood in that kitchen with her arms crossed and told me I was being selfish. She had stolen money in her pocket. Phyllis was arrested on a Wednesday afternoon in early October. Conspiracy to commit theft by deception, receiving stolen property, a felony in Pennsylvania when the amount exceeds $2,000. I don't know what she told the officers when they came. I imagine she was polite. Phyllis was always polite, right up until the moment she watched her husband shove me down a staircase and did absolutely nothing. She took a plea deal, 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, full restitution of the $34,000. She avoided prison time because she cooperated with the DA and gave testimony against Gordon. But for a woman who spent her entire life building the perfect family portrait for the neighbors and the church circle and the PTA, a criminal record was its own kind of cell, one she'd carry everywhere. Gordon's attorney tried to negotiate. The evidence didn't leave much room. Bank records don't lie, and Warren Healy's documentation was meticulous. Gordon took a plea, 3 to 6 years in state prison, full restitution of $187,400, which he didn't have and probably never would. He also lost his job. A community college can't employ a man with felony convictions for elder abuse and assault. 30 years of mediocre respectability, gone in one sentencing hearing. Glenn Fisk, the attorney who'd modified Nell's trust under Gordon's direction, he didn't go to prison, but the Pennsylvania Disciplinary Board opened proceedings against him within weeks. He'd altered legal documents, using a power of attorney that was obtained under fraudulent pretenses, without the grantor's informed consent. His license was suspended, and disbarment followed within 6 months. A separate investigation for forgery was still open last I heard. Some consequences are slow, but they still find you. And Keith, my brother, didn't face criminal charges. He hadn't stolen anything, hadn't forged anything, hadn't pushed anyone. But Nell sat him down privately, just the two of them, and told him the truth about his share of the estate. The money was there for him, every penny of his 50%, but he wouldn't see a single dollar until he completed a 90-day residential addiction treatment program. If he dropped out or relapsed before completion, his share would be redirected to a charitable trust. For the first time in Keith's life, nobody was going to fix it for him. No parents swooping in with a check. No sister guilted into sacrifice. Just Keith, a program, and the choice to either grow up at 35 or lose everything for real. I don't know yet which way that story goes. That's his to write. Nell took back full control of her estate, her properties, and her life. She moved out of Sycamore Ridge and into a nicer facility she chose herself, one in Emmaus, closer to me, where she picked her own room, had her own phone, and hosted Scrabble night every Tuesday without anyone's permission. She sees Rosie every Sunday morning.